Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. I want to let you know at the outset that I have the flu, and we debated whether I should go on or not, and I have an apartment in our campus, and I have been resting, and then I'm come straight from there to here to begin. So bear with me if I stumble a bit, but I'm ready, and I didn't want to miss today. And I'm glad to see names coming up like Eli and David, Carrier and Fogel and Sean, and we're going to get right into it. Take a look. 2 treatments. Control. Everything is not as it appears. Because I want to show you this experiment and contrast it with another one and talk about a subject where there's great confusion. There's a non-branded and a lightly branded page. The brand has been somewhat blurred, but you can see the two and you can get the sense of what's going on here. What do you think the impact of the brand is on conversion? It's very important because we often take brand for granted, but take a look, guess the impact, and let me show you the result. Taking the page and doing nothing but adding the brand increased revenue by 40%. Now, if you think you understand what that means, let me show you another experiment. This is also a huge brand. On the left side, there is light branding. On the right side, there is significant branding. There is a slight difference in the pages when we talk about how we isolate that in variable clusters. I won't get into it, but take a look, because in this case, the fully branded page reduced conversion by 34%. What's going on here? Good call, David, by the way, Dave Fogel. What is going on here? Why is there such a difference in terms of the brand impact? Everywhere I go, I hear confusion about brand. It's become an industry. This very morning, I was on the phone with a vice president of marketing for an organization that just rebranded. They rebranded, and conversion is dropped, and they're missing all of their numbers. And she asked me, what is the problem? And then she suggested the answer. The new brand creates confusion, does not identify who they are, and doesn't do the job that a brand is supposed to do. Beware. Many of my listeners are agencies, and agencies, I'm not against you, I'm for you, but agencies have made an industry of rebranding. And often what happens is we don't want to fix the plumbing, so we just paint the house. And we think it's going to make things work better, but it does not. It disguises the problem. On the other hand, brand has enormous power to move people through a process. We see that with Apple and others. So how do we understand the relationship between the brand and the value proposition? What's most important? How does changing or revising your value proposition impact what should be happening in the brand? And when we do a rebrand, can we afford to ignore the value proposition, or should the value proposition be re-articulated when we do a rebrand? All of this begs a critical question. And we're going to dive deeper into that question in just a few moments, but I want to introduce you to 2 leaders, Paul Montgomery and Lynn Stevens. As you can see from the notes on the slide, they've been leaders in the precious metal industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the marketplace was suffering from poor reputation. They decided to launch a new precious metal company. So to do this, they evaluated and developed a new value proposition based on their experience. And they worked with our scientists. And ultimately, they had to answer this question to formulate their value proposition. If I'm a current precious metal investor, why should I invest in precious metals with you rather than any other precious metal provider? That's a tough question. There was tough competition. I have worked with their toughest competition, and I have also worked with them. And they had to formulate an answer, and that answer is essentially an argument, and that argument can be summarized as a reason. Now, when you understand that, you realize that if you don't get a sufficient answer, meaning you can't field a strong enough argument, then you don't have a reason to start that business. So what do you do? Well, many of you are on the call right now, and you may have a small business, and you think, I can't even deal with brand right now. I can barely afford building my website. Listen, brand is something all of us should pay attention to, even a small business, because brand is a symbol. It's like stored equity. When I reach in my pocket, and I don't have one right now, or I wouldn't take out a dollar bill, if I were to hold that dollar bill up to you, you might tell me what it's worth. It's worth $1. If I were to hold up a $1,000 bill, you might tell me it's worth $1,000. But what is that piece of paper worth? Not much. It's not really that the green bill is worth that money. It's that it represents that. Used to, it represented something stored in Fort Knox, not anymore. In the digital economy, however, your dollar bills are still symbols of value. And in fact, every day we move around value without touching those dollar bills. We do it electronically. In the same way, brand carries with it a value, a weight. Warren Buffett has been astute in seeing brand value in a balance sheet that didn't appear in the numbers. That's why he made the investment in Coke, one of his best investments. So you as a small business or you as a Fortune 10 business, both need to be concerned with brand. Learning how to foster it and create it and build its value over the years is the surest way to create long-term financial viability. So what do we do? Well, in the case that I just brought up, we went through a value proposition intensive and we developed a series of levers around appeal and exclusivity. These are critical claims that could become part of that argument that could be summarized by that reason. And you can see what we worked with there. I won't spend a long time on it, but ultimately, after force ranking those, we developed a statement which was not perfect. It's not marketing language, but it's the essence of the argument. So why should I choose? If I'm a current precious metal investor, why should I choose the group we talked about, Heartland, over XYZ? Because customers can trust Heartland's relentless dedication to integrity. Now, by the way, that's just BS if you don't know how to provide evidentials. Relentless integrity and unparalleled market transparency. Again, that has to be backed up so that they're empowered to make the most informed precious metal investment decisions. Now, I want to tell you why that's a poor value proposition statement, and yet the best that we could do. Because the world isn't ideal, and unfortunately, they're not the only one in the marketplace. And there was no way to quantify in English language those statements yet, so we create the claim, but we footnote it. Now look at the footnotes. 1, 2, see the notes 3. Each of those tiny footnotes are the evidentials to support the modifiers in that sentence. Some of you are looking for a way to credibly make your claim and you just can't put it into a sentence. That's how you match evidentials with the claims in order to make them credible. Because if they don't understand, they cannot believe. If they understand but they do not believe, then you still have no value you can communicate to them because they've turned you down. They've turned you off. Your value doesn't exist for them. Practically speaking, there is no value for them. First, they must understand, then they must believe. And we've talked about this in other sessions. In fact, there is a whole series just on value propositions. If this is new to you, watch that series. Watch the latest one, and it summarizes all of this teaching. I can't reteach value proposition today, but I can teach you something I have never taught in a setting like this, and only taught in our master's degree college program. I'm literally pulling the notes from that program to help you understand something today that I think is a mystery. I think that the mystery is arbitrated, or arbitrage, let's say, by groups who try to make a brand redesign the end-all solution to a problem without understanding how a brand connects to the value proposition. So, we're going to go deeper today. We're going to move from Heartland Precious Metals all the way through Aristotle. But if you'll hang with me, if you'll commit yourself to thinking deeply, we'll come away with something tangible and practical. Today is not as simple as change the button. Today is not as simple as fix your headline. Today we're talking about the essence of your business, the essence of your business, the reason it should exist. And if you don't get that right, then all the rest doesn't matter. The marketplace is evolutionary, survival of the fittest. 80% of new businesses fail. Many older businesses dilute their value proposition and fail. As they get into trouble, they go for a rebrand and hope that's going to make the difference. Rarely does it ever. So let's learn. I also don't mean to be so somber, but I'm on a serious subject. I'm talking about something that is wrong with most of the people, companies that are probably going to tune in over the years to this particular broadcast. And I want to help you. And so let's wade in. This is what we did with Heartland. We first of all thought about how to create an impression. In a minute, I'm going to teach 3 critical principles, even a 4th. But I want you to see that we worked through various lexicons. And when you look at the top row, just soak it up for a second. Can you feel that Midwestern, the cowboy pictures, a set of values associated with the Midwest? They were located in Oklahoma. Then there's the cool sort of mechanical precision of the middle row. And then that fresh contemporary ease that you see on the bottom row. Believe it or not, the colors and the symbols and the pictures matter, but only matter when there's consistency between them, the claim, and what some people call the brand promise and the value proposition itself. So we opted for this piece at the top together. And that had to be translated into a series of words that match the imagery. It began with the logo, and we rejected many versions of the logo. We studied the typography. We studied the color palette. Then putting it all together, we crafted a site that was consistent both in the words and in the symbols on the page that support the words. That would be the imagery and even the colors, so that the entire brand package forms a sort of grammar, a consistent language with which the company is able to communicate to its prospective buyers. Now, if you're following that, you're looking at what might be just another brand redesign, except that it wasn't, because this choice was tightly linked to the essence of the value proposition. All right? And so with that in mind, here is the question that I want to ask and answer together. How do we effectively leverage our value proposition to build a brand, especially from the ground up? You say, well, I've got an existing company. Yes, but does your brand have any equity at this point? And if you do have equity, how much does it have? Because the stronger you can create the stronger experience of the brand that you can create, the greater the equity you can store into the mental bank that's so important to the success of your business. So I want to take you to a systematic approach for thinking through the argument of the value proposition and the way you execute the brand strategy. Does this make sense? Can you follow why this is so important? Let me tell you one easy reason why. I've seen a lot of terrible sites get high conversion rates simply because the brand equity was so high. I've said this before when it comes to Apple. Many people have copied Apple's web page strategy without realizing that it wasn't the web page strategy that made them success. It was the brand itself. Indeed, most of us don't have people waiting for 3 days, camping in a line to get our latest product. All that friction, all that anxiety. But Apple could get away with that because people trusted the brand. They had a sense for the consistency of what they were going to get from their interaction with the brand and its products. Apple is jeopardizing that today, but it's still doing well enough because of the pent-up equity, the huge store of reserve in the minds of the world. Which is a key point, by the way. Brand doesn't exist on a balance sheet, of course. It doesn't exist in the company. The power of the brand is derived from an expectation in the mind. Apple's power is that you expect something from Apple, and when they produce a new product, as long as they are consistent, you'll continue to expect it. In fact, it intensifies. The moment it disappoints, and it has been disappointing, the brand suffers. All right. Are you ready? That's a lot of intensity. So I'm going to take you to the first point. Here's a critical delineation. The value proposition is an argument, but brand is an impression. Now, I want to help you right now. Think about the top of your web page where you likely have a brand and ask yourself a question. Does the brand make an impression that's consistent with the argument of the value proposition. In fact, let me help you further. Some of you, I've seen this today when I was talking to the vice president I mentioned earlier. You have some sort of markup here. Let's call this your brand. Now, depending on the name and the picture associated with the name, so you have a name, you have sometimes an image. It may just be a strange way to do the type font, but it's a unique image. And often you have, let's call it a slogan, which is not necessarily your value prop. That's important to know. These three components often work together. Now, this is not all that constitutes a brand. We're talking about the mark at the top of the page with your name. You know, the brand is elucidated through the rest of the page, like we saw, the typography, the font choice itself, the colors, etc. But let's just dwell on this important mark. There is something that I worked on as a very young man that applies directly to this, and that is understanding how wide the gap is for an implication. If you're just joining us, we're talking about brand and the value proposition. If you like it, subscribe and give us a thumbs up and share. I have the flu today. I'm trying to teach with the flu, but I didn't want to disappoint you. But I want you to see again this point about implication. Apple's implication with its original brand, I'm not going to try to draw it here, but we've all seen the apple, is vast. That's a big bridge to come somehow connecting the picture of an apple with a bite out of it to the impression they're trying to make was a huge stretch. So how do they cross that span? Some brands, the picture connotates very closely the impression they're trying to make, but the Apple brand didn't. And Steve has talked about why he chose the Apple, but the bottom line is, before we had all the exposure to the Apple advertising, none of us would have associated an Apple with any of the slogans or the mindset that Apple tends to generate among its followers. So their stretch from the name and the image and the slogan was very far. But Apple has something you don't have. It has two things you don't have. It had Steve Jobs, and it had a big budget. Apple's famous for its Super Bowl commercials. In one commercial, they impacted thinking all over this country and perhaps the world. They spent huge amounts of money in order to get that implication across and then to anchor it with the image. But you don't have huge amounts of money, perhaps. Maybe you do. But I'm going to assume you don't, so that my teaching is more relevant. When that occurs, what you need to be able to do is to make a shorter gap between your claim, your name, image, and slogan, and the impression that you're trying to make. The distance here is much shorter than the distance here. So the first key for you to understand is that on your page, you need the argument that answers the question, if I am the ideal customer, why should I purchase from you rather than fill in the options? X, Y, Z, the top three choices. That's your argument for existence. That's the most persuasive point you can communicate to a customer. But you want to also generate an impression, sometimes even before they have seen your value proposition, and then you want to reinforce the impression in the packaging. Apple does that very well. And in the overall product experience, and in the subsequent communication. Now, if that's the case, be very careful that you choose an impression that complements the conclusion generated by the argument. Which brings me to the second point. It's a critical one. Brand stimulates an impression, and the value proposition fosters a conclusion. The vice president of that company that I spoke with earlier today, beneath the brand, which really did a poor job, it widened the implied gap, did not have a proper headline on the page, had a title, and then a grand, braggadocious claim with no evidence, and then a call to action. Now, it's not her fault. And in fact, she's reaching out to get help. She's trying to understand. But it's important for you to understand that you've got to get the value proposition articulated right, and then you want to create an impression that connects with the argument. What does that look like in practical terms? Well, let me give you an example. If you're a CPA, I'm just making this up, it's not in my notes, there may be a better way to explain myself, and you want to give people the sense that you're trustworthy and that you're reliable and they can trust you with their financial numbers, and you can make some claims about your competence and your capabilities. Be very careful that your website, if it's shoddy and misorganized, or there's paragraphs with misspellings in them, if the copy isn't on point, even that is creating a negative impression that hurts the conclusion you're trying to create. Now that's a simple, perhaps exaggerated point or example, but I want you to get the idea. Make certain the impression serves the conclusion. Now, this is the easy part. We're going to get deeper here in just a moment. But I want to make sure that you're tracking with me. And I want to make sure that with this flu, I'm still communicating well enough with you. So, use the chat feature to ask a question if you need help. And I want to help you right now. And Brian, welcome. I saw your note and I appreciate you being here with us today. And David, thanks for asking people to hit the like button. All right, here we go. Brands can attempt to create an impression that occurs before and after the purchase. But if there's not alignment between the brand promise and the experience of the value proposition, that impression is nullified, it's gone. So, in keeping with everything I've been teaching, you've got to get continuity between the impression of the brand and the experience of the value proposition. Let's keep going though. So let's look at this for just a second. On the left is the argument. On the right, there's a general impression. The argument has that horse in the background, the Midwest, Oklahoma, cowboys, and we're trying to play on that theme of solid Midwestern trustworthiness. Now, it's not enough by itself, but with the argument, look at the argument. The founders have 50 years experience and have the high, and by the way, the reason we chose this, you may think this is sort of a weak approach, is because they were at the head of, let's call it the watchdog agency for the entire industry. They're big names in the industry, and they were they were a member of the group that enforces ethics within the industry, and for that reason, they were playing on all of that experience and trust that they generated from 30 years in the space. We needed to make the site match that. But the most effective brands, now this is where it gets interesting, leverage the brand impression to foster a conclusion not just about the company, but also about the identity of the person. Now we're going to start to see something interesting. You know, people are often buying from you not simply because they're trying to fix a problem. That's the shallow level of marketing that we often hear. They want something. It's true. But more often than not, beneath the want is something deeper. People are striving for meaning. Philosophers and psychologists from Viktor Frankl to Kierkegaard have seen that what some people call the existential vacuum or the angst that's in our society. And one way to try and solve for that is with materialism. And another way is to buy something that helps bring meaning to your own identity. And that is beneath a lot of what happens in the marketplace. And we don't think deep enough to get into that place in the mind. So let's see how Apple leveraged that with Steve's instincts, because it really did so. And we'll look at other examples also. Now you're looking at one of the earlier versions of the Apple logo, and think different. And as you look at it, I want you to look at the pictures. What do each of these pictures have in common? Can someone tell me? Use your chat feature. What is it that these pictures have in common? Because there's a reason they were chosen, each one of them. I'll give you a second. As you're thinking about that, I'm going to watch for your feedback to come in. I want to emphasize to you, iconic rebels. Arlene, well said. Achievement, yes. Radicals, people who are different. Every one of those people represents the exception, not the rule. Now, what's going on here? Look at the Marlboro man. Somebody tell me, there's been a lot of different models who were selected for that role. They don't even look alike in some ways, but they have a certain commonality. What is the commonality besides a cowboy hat? The obvious. What is it about this picture of each one of these men that's communicated in the craggy faces, in the hats, even in the clothes, in the actions? Yakov says, my own man. Yes. Eye focus, says Gordon. That's true. There's something in the eyes. What is it, though? What do you see when you look at them? What's the connotation of those images? All right? I'll help you just a little bit. You see a rugged man, strength. Somebody said solitary. Yeah, ready to stand on his own. Now, it's disgusting to me the way the nicotine salesman is using this approach, but it works. Rugged is the right word, Sean. Listen to me now. I'm going to start to confuse you, but if you'll go with me deeply for a second, I'll explain why, and we're going to drop into Aristotle, and we're going to learn something that you can't get in a book somewhere that'll help you with your own company. What's happening here is a form of hypnosis. Hypnosis is the bypassing of the critical censor. Anyone who studies hypnosis will discover that you don't have to be in a trance to be hypnotized. In fact, studies indicate that if you see the same commercial 16 times, it'll probably penetrate past your critical censor. Inside of your mind, let's talk about that for a second. Inside of your mind, so I'm putting a face here. Inside of your mind, there is a powerful piece that believes almost anything. If you've seen a child, children will believe that there's an elephant, outside the door when they're young enough. They believe in Santa Claus, etc. This piece in the mind is so powerful that when it believes, it will actually create a lot of things that are possible simply because it believes. For instance, there are people who, if they think they have cancer, will exhibit the symptoms of cancer simply because they believe so. This piece has a guard that develops from your youth up called the critical censor, and the critical censor forms a wall, and it listens to incoming data, and it determines whether or not that data matches the existing program, and if it doesn't, it rejects that. If it does match the program, it lets it in. Without that wall, we would all die at an early age, because that's the skeptic in you that says, no, I shouldn't step in front of that bus. That's the skeptic in you that says, no, I shouldn't get in a car with that stranger. That's the skeptic in you that protects you from buying everything that's advertised on TV. What is happening with a brand is almost mystical when it's done right. What's happening with a brand is it is penetrating the defenses of the critical censor and getting into this part that believes. You say, well, that doesn't happen to me. I've got a strong mind. Then why do you sit in a movie theater on the edge of your seat, so wrapped up in what happens to that flashing light on the screen in front of you? Because the experience of a good story is one of the most powerful ways to bypass the critical censor and impact the subconscious mind. And in that suspended state that you achieve when watching a movie, you get lost in the story, and this fake person who has memorized the lines, who's not even really in the room, in a movie that you might have seen 3 times and you already know how it's going to turn out, and yet you sit there on the edge of your seat deeply concerned about the outcome. Movies drive us. They draw us with 2 things, curiosity and then suspense. Curiosity is what's going to happen next, but suspense is more important. Suspense is what's going to happen to that person next. And the more you identify with the character, the more you care about what happens to them. Now listen, a great brand gets past the critical censor and into the mind. And there are a number of ways to do that. You can go to a brilliant hypnotherapist. I'm not talking about some scam artist, but I'm talking about a gifted psychiatrist like Erickson. And he can work with you, and you don't even know that he's getting past the critical censor, and he gets past it and does surgery and fixes something. A paranoia, a fear of heights, a problem with being in public, and on the list goes. Many neuroses have been cured by these Geniuses who understand how to bypass the critical censor and get into the subconscious mind and rework the programming. Now, that's not just the province of hypnotherapists or psychotherapists, psychiatrists. In every way, each day we're being impacted by messaging, and culture inoculates us to what in German is called a Weltanschauung, a worldview where we see the world through a certain set of eyes. One of the most powerful influences on the entire culture, we all know, is the film and television industry. And it has a means of bypassing the critical censor and tying up this inside in knots with new thinking. Now stop for just a second and listen to me. When you see, why did the tobacco company spend so much money? Take me back. Why did the tobacco company spend so much money on those billboards and on those commercials? Now, they've been forbidden from television for a long time, so they've had to resort to billboards. At times, they've been on television. But in every case, they are trying to get you to believe something about yourself that's connected to their product. One of the great masters of this, you want to watch the best commercials in television, it's the beer commercials. Somehow in the American culture, drinking alcohol makes you more of a man, makes you a better friend, and on the list goes. We are always being tied up in knots. I study marketing because I study psychology, because I want to understand philosophy, because I want to understand myself. And one of the great insights that has shook my life is understanding how hypnotized I am by all these messages that are being poured into my mind in various ways to try and influence my behavior. Now, although all of that sounds negative, there's a good and positive way you can leverage brand to help people. It's not the gun that's wrong, it's the man who pulls the trigger. I'm not here to talk about gun control, I'm trying to make a point. You can use marketing to help people take free inoculations. You can use marketing to help the world and make it a better place. You can find meaning in your marketing. Some of you I know on here. David Carrier uses marketing to help the middle class protect themselves against a horrific tragedy. Man, everybody needs somebody like David in their marketplace to help them. There's value when you do this right. But you first of all need to understand the power of this. So, how many boys, girls growing up on TV, watching a star with a cigarette in their mouth, decided that somehow sucking on this cancer stick is going to make them become something that they want to be? It's actually absurd. Let's keep going. Let's take it deeper and show you why it works. So here is a bust of Aristotle. Aristotle's famous for his work in logic and many other things, but syllogism is the form of logic that Aristotle wrote about. Some of you heard about it. I'm going to show you how the syllogism works in your branding. Okay? Can I just stop for a moment? I know that I'm talking about something that's a bit abstract. Give me some feedback. Is this on point for you? Are you following the logic? I'm watching your chat feature, and talk to me very quickly so that I can get an impression as to what you're thinking and to make sure I'm still zeroed in on what matters to you. I'm watching for your feedback. So far I've got 0. I assume that means I'm boring as mud. Okay, thank you, Brian. I see yours coming in. This next piece is where you start to see how it all ties together, all right? Thank you for your feedback, team. I'm watching you, and I want to adjust what I'm doing. I believe the audience optimizes the speaker. Let's look at Aristotle's syllogism. It consists of 3 things, P1, P2, and P3. And if you don't understand what you see on the left, let me show you the famous formulation on the right. All men are mortal. That's P1. That's a middle term and a predicate. Socrates is a man. So that's the subject and the middle term again. Remember the man piece that you saw up at the top, middle man at P1, and then man in P2? Where does man appear in P3? It's not necessary, because now we're able to conclude from P1 and P2 by looking at the subject and the predicate. If you don't understand this, just look on the right. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Think about it for a second. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is immortal. That's simple to understand in its essence. That's called a syllogism. Now listen to me. That's what's happening in brand. You say, how? I don't understand. Let me show you. Brands create a virtual syllogism in the minds of their customers by bringing their subject, the customer experience, into alignment with a clear predicate. What could that be? Well, here we go. I'll show you, but let me take you through a little bit of history. Maybe 2 slides forward. I'm going to resolve the tension of this, but take a look. When Steve took over, Apple maybe had 90 days of money left. Steve looked for just the right person to help him. He had a friend. He brought him in. And the art director was trying to help Apple communicate something that was hard to communicate, hard to put into words. But he was inspired by this surrealist painting, The Treachery of Images. You can see it. And it says in French, "This is not a pipe." Now, I'm at the beach in Florida. There's somebody who copied this. I doubt the surfers know this, many of them, but they'll show a certain weird-looking shoe and say, "This is not a shoe." And it's essentially a sandal disguised as a shoe, and they use the same approach with this pipe, and I'm sure they're harking back to this. But this stuck in the mind of the ad team. And they doodled something down right here, the idea that something is more than what it appears to be. And this advertising man wrote, "This is not a box." And that's sort of what computers looked like in those days. And then he shifted to Dr. Seuss, whose so many characters are outcasts, they're different. And he wrote next to one of the doodles, "Think different." And that was the genesis of something percolating in the subconscious, forming a mosaic in the mind of these men as they tried to communicate something about Apple that was unique. Eventually they chose the slogan, "Think different," and it had powerful impact. It influenced the great Super Bowl commercial. And Steve said, and this is important, "Think different celebrates the soul of the Apple brand." I want you to notice these words. The creative people with passion can change the world for the better. Now, that led to a syllogism. All people who use Apple products think differently. I use Apple products, therefore I think differently. And remember, a word is just a container. It has a handle. You pick it up and you put it with other words to create meaning. It doesn't represent, it is not meaning itself. It only represents meaning. It is a container. It carries meaning. And in this case, think differently didn't just mean different. It means that those creative people, if you are old enough, you remember that in those days, Apple was still being used by the art community. Bill Gates had destroyed it to the business community, monopolized it. But artists still liked their Apple. And there was this peculiar group of radicals who still favored Apple over the PC, even when they couldn't get the software they needed, and even when Apple really screwed up the line of products. Steve went right into the essence of their legacy, pulled out that artful creative who wants to do something different, tied it to the word "think differently," built a virtual syllogism, and then messaged in such a way as you started to think, well, I want to be one of those people who thinks differently. And for that very same reason, he resurrected the brand. And using that messaging, he appealed to you in a unique way. He helped you see yourself in a new light. And therein is the power of brand to create an impression. Okay? So stay with me. Originally marketed to women in the 20s, Marlboro did not begin marketing to men until the late 50s, when concerns about smoking cigarettes without filters began affecting the market. Inspired by the ruggedness of TV cowboys, Marlboro focused on appealing to that type of person. It wanted these men to be admired. And here we are. All people who smoke Marlboro are rugged, tough, and manly. I smoke Marlboro. Therefore, I'm rugged and tough and manly. Do you know how preposterous that is? Do you know how absurd that is? Do you know how stupid that? It's hard for me to believe such things work, but it worked. Because we have a unique capability as human beings to synthesize content and to believe and make so things that it's hard for psychologists and today yet even in neuroscience to explain what's going on there. Indeed, it works. We know it works. We can't explain why. And even what I'm laying out here is and I know I've oversimplified it for those of you with lots of expertise. I'm trying to help an audience. But even this is a theory, but we can use this theory and get a result. And we can get it over and over again to help patients or to do what Marlboro did. And which I think, by the way, is crime. But you're not here to hear me talk about crimes. And so ultimately, what you need to take away with from this whole conversation is the power of brand to operate like a virtual syllogism. And it leads me to a critical conclusion. And I'm going to get ahead of my slides because I want you to learn this. And by the way, Sean, I know your note. The opposite argument has been made. I'm looking at Sean Hoffman's quote. It was culture that turned me off to Apple. There are some people, you can always see this when you're designing your campaigns, some people move towards opportunity, some people move away from fear. Some people identify meaning by being different. Some find meaning by being like others. You can take the opposite end of this, and there are many successful campaigns that leverage somebody's desire to be like everyone else. And indeed, it depends on who you're targeting and what your message is. But let's keep going. I'm going to show you one more thing. And this begins to help you understand something that will be practical about changes to the copy on your website today. And here it is. Before, you've heard me teach this. I just put it up here. I won't teach it. Look at the earlier videos and you can learn it. People make some observations based on the branding on your site. That's an observation. And the messaging. And those observations lead them to form a conclusion. Everybody remembers this, right? Observation, conclusion. Somebody tells me what comes after the conclusion. The conclusion influences what? I'm going to watch here till I see it. Dave Fogel loves his iPad. All right, somebody tell me. What happens from the conclusion? Because this is how people become customers. This is in Greek called metanoia. All right? You're almost there, Yaakov. Before the experience, before the conclusion, they make a decision. And the decision comes with an expectation. There you see the power of brand. And the expectation is followed by an experience, which becomes the new observation. I've taught it before, so I'm just touching it fast. What I want you to see now, however, is that this observation leads to this conclusion. And this conclusion, i.e., this is the right choice for me, leads to a decision. I will buy. And that conclusion, by the way, has 4 components, and I teach them in the value proposition. But I want you to notice something that I haven't taught on here, except I've mentioned it in passing, that connects to the syllogism. They draw 2 conclusions, sometimes 3. These are transcendent conclusions, not the 4 that you learn in the value proposition. They draw a conclusion about you. They personify your website. They conclude that they can trust you or not. It doesn't matter what you offer. If I can't trust you, I'm not going to buy it from you. So don't think that you just have to convince them about your product. They have to make a conclusion. They have to draw a conclusion about you and then about your offering. So it's twofold. Sometimes there's a third. A conclusion about you, a conclusion about your offering, and a conclusion about themselves, i.e., what buying this will do for them. Those 3 are powered by the 4 conclusions of the value prop, which I've taught in other places and can't teach today. So you need to understand that the syllogism works right in here during this conclusion set, and Apple helped you conclude that if you buy this new iPad, you're going to be different. And this implies, in its own way, superior. But that's a different argument. So then, back to Heartland. All investors who use Heartland value family integrity and caring for the future. I'm an investor who uses Heartland, therefore I value family integrity and caring for the future. This is the syllogism powering the brand, supported by the value proposition. And ultimately, it comes together in this argument. Value proposition is an argument. Brand is an impression. You need to know the difference. The brand stimulates an impression. The value proposition fosters a conclusion. The 2, this is number 3, have to agree. If there's an alignment between the promise and the experience, it all blows up. And the most effective brands leverage the brand impression to foster a conclusion not just about the company, but about the identity of the person purchasing. Some of us are failing in our copy to help someone see how they are different by purchasing from you. Some of us are listening to this and you're thinking, how do I cash that in? It comes right down to the symbols on your page. Does your brand support the message of your value proposition? Is it clear that that argument connects to that impression? Are you helping people understand what this purchase does for themselves, not just in terms of utility, but in terms of ontology, who they are? When you think this way, you'll learn how to communicate with far more power. Some people around you won't understand it. Even great copywriters don't understand it. Because essentially, you're working to get past the critical censor to establish a piece of real estate in the mind, to occupy that real estate. And by the way, if you capture that real estate and then you don't deliver in the experience, you will lose it, and you will lose it with prejudice. So we must be careful. Don't fall for the rebranding game. Yes, there's a time to rebrand, but do it intentionally and understanding how to link the value proposition and the brand together. I see a question from Elad. So the uniqueness of the customer experience should be in the center of the brand impression. The experience should be connected, Elad, to the expectation created by the combination of the brand and the value proposition. Both of those, the impression and the conclusion, create an expectation. And when they experience the product, it should, honestly, it shouldn't match it. It should exceed the expectation, and then you really got power. Somebody says, do you have examples from media industry? Pratty, I don't know what that question means. I've used Apple and Marlboro. What precisely do you mean? If you can share with me more, I'll help you. I know that I did this with the New York Times, and they're a media company, and this is how we helped them launch their digital offering and reach out and have such success. They went from 0 to 500 million on that run. They ran on our servers for about 12 years. All we were doing was testing critical paths. We had 300 paths that we were testing. Dave, thank you for the kind words. I've been pretty sick today, and you've been patient with me, and I appreciate that. I also know that I didn't give you something as practical today as last week when we looked at web pages and just tore them down and fixed them. But I need you to think deeper. And I want to leave you with this. Please, if you're joined us this far, don't leave yet. I've got just a few more minutes, and I'm going to drop all my notes and talk to you as a marketer. Marketer, in the same way that Marlboro can deceive us, and we've been deceived in many cases by culture, most of us have been hurt in the image we have of ourselves as marketers by the culture's connotation for what a marketer is. We associate marketing with what we just saw in the technique of Marlboro, and we somehow lose the most important aspect of our work, and that is its meaning. If you get up every day and can't find meaning in your work, it's hard to keep going. If I could reach down with a magic wand and wave it over your head and change something in many of the people who tune in, it would be to understand that as a marketer, you have a chance to make an impact that's remarkable, not just in your career, but with all those around you. To be a truly effective marketer, you have to deeply understand what's happening inside of the mind, align with that, and use it to create value in the world. And you can. Many of you don't even think of yourself as marketers. You're entrepreneurs, but that is the essence of marketing. It's not the capital. You can't build a value proposition unless you understand customers. That's a marketing exercise. Peter Drucker saw that. He said everybody in the organization is in marketing. What I want to do with you in the future is build a community who appreciates what we can do and the power of marketing to drive positive impact. But to do that, we have to realize that this discipline that we're learning, it's like a soft martial art. It's a force that you can use to do amazing, positive things that bring impacts in the world and that can give you a legacy with your work. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for putting up with my symptoms. And I'll see you next week, 1 o'clock on Wednesday.